Hi and welcome. My name is Tolan and I'm the co-founder of Productivity Me. In this video, we're going to look at how to adjust the height and width of both columns and rows, and we'll do that using the employee's reference worksheet. So if you're interested, go ahead and join us in this video. If you want to follow along, go ahead and download the exercise file 05.03. As you may have noticed from some of the examples that we've used throughout the course thus far, individual columns that we have been using have different widths. So the column here in H is a different width than that of G, which is a different width than that of F. Now, you're going to occasionally have rows which have different heights, and we'll get to that in a second. But how do you go about and you change the individual widths of a column? It's pretty straightforward. When you first create a worksheet, generally all of your columns are going to be the same width, and all of your rows are going to be the same height. So if you want to change an individual column's width, you can do so by coming up to either the right or the left portion of that column. You would get your cursor so that it becomes this little arrow this little black line with arrows on either side, and you can drag to the right to make it larger, or you can drag to the left to make it larger. Now, if you drag it to the left, as you'll see, it will essentially make the column on its left smaller, whereas if you drag it to the right, it won't change the default size of column D. So again, if I were to bring the column here, it's going to make column C a lot wider, but column D is still going to be the same width. Whereas if you were to, say, come here and you were to drag your column this way, it's going to make C larger, but at the expense of column B. So that's one way to change the column width. Another way to change the column width is you can select multiple columns, right? So you can select column E and you can select column F, and if you have multiple columns selected, they will both go to that default size. So say that I wanted to make these three columns the same size, I could do that and adjust it, and they would all adjust to that specific size. Now, if you want to adjust a row's height, you can do that by dragging again up, either at the bottom or at the expense of the cell above, at the top like that. Now let's look at this with some specific data. Now let's say that we were to make this individual column here a little bit smaller. If we make it smaller, then certain pieces of the text are going to be cut off and we can't read it. Now if you manually come up here, you could adjust the width so that it would probably be more or less good. But there are going to be occasions where you wish that there wasn't a lot of wasted space. If there's something in the cell and you want to adjust that column to the specific width of your cell, you could double click and it will essentially make that column as wide as the longest entry. So currently our longest entry is customer relations. If we were to add another thing, maybe customer relations and service. Well, currently there's nothing to our right in this cell here. So text will basically run on to the next line. But if this was, say, something like Tolan Thornton at Tech Company, clearly my typing this evening is quite bad, then you can't really see the difference. So if you wanted it to adjust to that new size, again, you would come up here and you would double click and it would automatically go to this width because customer relations and service is now the longest entry. Okay, so we have a sense of how to adjust columns, but what about rows? Now rows are kind of similar. So say that you had something like employee ID here, and you wanted to make it a little bit wider or a little bit longer, you could do that. If, say, you change the text size, which we'll talk about in a later video, you can adjust it just like you can for columns by double clicking, and it would automatically adjust to the size, to the height of that row, and then you could double click here and that would automatically adjust to the width of that column. So if you wanted to select all of your cells in a worksheet, you could do this by clicking this little cell here, the cell, or I guess the little space between column A and row 1. One of the advantages of doing this is, say that we had a lot of cells that were not the right width or the right length. So maybe we had a lot of rows which were a little bit too narrow and we couldn't read everything. Now, if we want to adjust this, it's a a three-step process. Step one is to come here and select all the cells in your worksheet. Then if you want to make an adjustment so that all of your columns are the right width, you would double click in between any two columns. And these would essentially mean that now your columns are all wide enough. Now you'd have to do the same thing where if you want all of your rows to be high enough, or I guess correct, you would have to double click between that. So again, it's kind of a two-step process. Let's say that, well, that didn't work very well. Let's say that you had a bunch of rows which were too narrow and a bunch of columns which were too narrow also. If we wanted to remedy this, we could come here and select all of our data and then double click between the columns. That would adjust our columns so that our columns are the correct width, and we could double click here and then our rows are the right width, or the right height, I guess. So this video, relatively simple. We looked at how to adjust individual column size by either dragging to the right or dragging to the left. We looked at auto-fitting columns by right-clicking on any individual column. We looked at changing the the height of a specific row, or we could auto-adjust by double-clicking. Lastly, we looked at the idea of selecting all of our cells like this, and then we can either adjust the column width or the row height if that is an issue. In our next video, we're going to go ahead and look at the idea of wrapping text and what that might offer in and when using Microsoft Excel. So if you're interested, go ahead and join us in that video. All right, we'll see you again soon. And as always, thanks for watching.